A local lawmaker believes Illinois needs its own Department of Government Efficiency to clean the state's $50 billion budget.
Some in the community argue it would cause more harm than good. WIFR's Nathaniel Langley discovers what's next for the proposal.
We could find some places to save the taxpayers some dollars.
State Rep John Cabello believes Elon Musk and the Trump administration have it right.
Yes!
A Department of Government Efficiency cleans budgets.
You can never have too many eyes, and that budget is so immense.
The Republican proposes an Illinois DOGE, with 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans on one board examining the state's $53 billion budget.
We're also wanting those everyday citizens that can look and see where their tax dollars are going.
Outside Congressman Darren LaHood's office in Rockford, protesters say their concern remains on the federal impact.
Introduction of this bill is nothing but a gimmick to legitimize the actions of the unelected billionaire.
What consideration? What, 2 people or 4 people in Cabello's proposal? That's not how that works.
I don't have a whole lot of hope now, and that's why these people are here, because we're really, really scared.
If you don't want to be a part of this, don't. Step aside, but don't get in the way.
Cabello claims his proposal isn't about politics, it's for taxpayers.
There's ways of having efficiency in government, and we've got to find those ways.
In Winnebago County, Nathaniel Langley, WIFR News.
The bill remains pretty far from Governor J.B. Pritzker's desk.
Cabello hopes the priority of helping taxpayers inspires a bipartisan response.